Hello. So I'm just checking in again. Can you hear me now? Hello. Okay, I can see Ocean there. Ocean, can you hear me? Okay, okay. Thanks. Thank you, Ocean. So, hello everyone. I guess it's good evening in Nepal. Uh, and where our guest is, it's good afternoon, and for me, it's a good morning. I can see Francesca here again. So, Francesca, let me join her in. So, as our guest is joining in, let me ask you, uh, let's start with a note and try to
Yeah.
understand how all are feeling today. Francesca, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me too?
okay. Yes, great.
Maybe it's because I
Okay,
didn't put my earphones, but now it's in.
okay,
So,
okay. That's all right now. So before we move ahead, to all the people who are joining in and going to listen to us, can you please share with us where are you from, joining in from, how are you feeling, how have you been? So as you will be sharing this, I'll just give you a little bit of a brief about what we will be talking about. So hello, everyone. Once again, I'm Bhawana Shrestha, the co-founder of My Emotions Matter, and today I'll be hosting our Instagram live session. Today we'll be discussing about emotional literacy to overcome emotional abuse. And the objective of today's session is to discuss perspectives on the importance of emotional literacy to learn about ourselves and the impact of our actions on the people around us. And our another objective is to discuss emotional literacy skills that can allow us to understand and break the cycle of emotional abuse. To those of us who have joined, I think you know a little bit about My Emotions Matter already, but to give you a glimpse of what we do. So we are a value-based education initiative in Kathmandu, Nepal. We create self-reflective learning experiences to help individuals, schools, and organizations identify, understand, and resolve interpersonal relationship problems via emotional intelligence. We believe in a world where people are aware of their thoughts and feelings, make intentional choices, and live a purposeful life that benefits both themselves and others. Our services include training, consulting, research, as well as coaching services to tackle people problems by emotional intelligence. And you can get information about us and also about the work that we do via multiple social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we're also available on YouTube. You can listen to our podcast, and also there are multiple other educational resources that we have prepared. And today, we are joined by a wonderful guest all the way from Madrid, and she is Francesca Raoelison, and she is the founder and executive director of Omena. Educator and speaker, Omena works alongside an army of 200 plus volunteers. Their global team consists of 100% women from 13 different countries, including Canada, Peru, France, Morocco, India, China, and more. And they are all united in their commitment to breaking the cycle of emotional abuse around the world. She's also a TEDx speaker and was named RI Inno's 25 under 25. She has helped students develop essential knowledge and skills relating to social entrepreneurship, organized around the initiation, planning, growth, and development of new and emerging opportunities, culminating with development of a social enterprise business plan. So welcome to our Instagram live, Francesca. How have you been? How has life like been treating you after our conversation a few like a month back? So how are
month.
you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I think it's 9 a.m. on your side, and thank you for everyone who are tuning in right now. I see a few people familiar account that I can see. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for inviting me. I think the last time you and I talked, it was just a lot of sharing, and it was awesome to be able to connect with someone who had similar vision and also who has worked in the space, education, social emotional intelligence. So it's just a pleasure for me to be able to exchange with you because I feel like this is more of a conversation than anything else. And of course, to let people know about the work that we do, and um, hopefully also raise awareness around the issue, and also talk more about emotional literacy. How are you?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm all fine, right? So last since our conversation, I've been busy with a few of the like writing stuff because I'm working on a
Hmm.
policy on social emotional learning for
Hmm.
Nepal, and that has been taking up a lot of my time. And to actually like to research about the context and to realize that a lot of students who are in need of support in terms of their social emotional needs, it has
Hmm.
been like a very overwhelming journey in a sense, because there are lots of students who are actually saying we really need this, and the
Hmm.
support that we have been able to provide, it's very little in comparison to what they are in need of. So yeah, that's where actually it's that's why I think it's a very like collaborative effort, what you are doing, what other organizations all around the world are doing. It's That's why we're trying to like collaborate and talk to a lot of people who are actually working in this field. So as
Hmm.
we are talking about work, I know that you are also working with a lot of people, especially adolescents as well. So Francisca, can you please share a little about your work, what you're doing,
Hmm.
and how you started working, a little bit glimpse of like what your work is like.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll try to start from the beginning. I am originally from Madagascar. I grew up all my life in Madagascar, and then I came to the US a few years ago now. I can't remember, but I went to a community college in Virginia where I learned where I did psychology as a major, and where I was also a sexual assault peer educator. And that's where I first learned about all of the different forms of abuse, especially emotional, verbal, and psychological. And back then, growing up in Madagascar, the only forms of abuse that I knew were physical and sexual. That's all. So the other forms for me were, I couldn't put a name on it. I could see it sometimes, but I didn't know that it was not right. I mean, it was wrong to do it. So it all started with me understanding what it was, putting a name on it, and realizing that I was not the only one going through that. Because growing up in Madagascar, and I know in a lot of countries, um, emotional abuse can be something that we live, but we cannot really see that it's actually detrimental to our mental health, our self-esteem, and just the way we are behaving overall. So, um, in Madagascar, for example, people would walk down the street and see people, parents, for example, yelling at their children, or couples fight, and nobody would say anything because that's just how it is. And later on, when you realize actually that that's called emotional abuse, that it's wrong, you start having this lens where you start seeing, not everywhere, but in a lot of situations, when you start seeing the red flags, you start seeing how people are behaving and how it can impact other people. So that's where the awareness started for me. And also the awareness of me going through it, because I grew up in an emotionally abusive environment in my household, but I didn't know it because I didn't have, again, the vocabulary, the knowledge about it. And it was through a lot of, I would say, research. I was fascinated by the subject. I wanted to understand why people did that, why it existed, and what were the consequences. And when I realized, I started talking about it. I talked about it in my school. I asked people if they ever heard of that type of abuse, and sometimes they would say yes. Sometimes they themselves didn't have the definition. So I ended up, I can't remember how, but I ended up being interviewed by MTV, where they
Hmm.
wanted to hear about the story, and also how I ended up actually advocating as a survivor of emotional abuse. And I all of that ended up having an impact on myself, first of all, because I did a lot of, I would say, work to understand myself. And also, psychology was my first major in college because I wanted to understand myself. And it was a huge puzzle that I could kind of put together at that time. And when I shared about my story, that's when I realized I was not alone. I shared a video on social media where I shared about my story and also the vision that I had in promoting social emotional intelligence, which is literally emotional literacy as a way to prevent and break the cycle of emotional abuse. Because
Mm-hmm.
through the research, I realized that sometimes people don't realize that what they're doing is called emotional abuse, and sometimes it's because of a lack of tools that we didn't have growing up. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the vision we have, that we can break that cycle by promoting social emotional learning. So that's our mission overall, and in a nutshell, how it all started.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very in a way, a very like a transformative journey from how you were um, in that cycle yourself in the beginning, and then being able to break that cycle yourself, and then now serving others who might be going through that cycle. That's really impressive. It's very transformative, and that's very inspiring as well. But what I have realized is, Francisca, that we have been like using this term emotional abuse. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people don't know exactly what emotional abuse is. So,
Right.
can you like, and you also said that you and your team are working to break the cycle of emotional abuse around the world. So,
Mm-hmm.
can you
Yes,
share with our audience who will be like, who are live and or will
of
be
course.
watching us in our recorded video, that what does emotional abuse mean and what does it look like, or in our daily lives, but also how is it different than physical abuse or sexual abuse? So, what it is like.
Right. Yes, I should have started with that. Thank you for the question. Um, so emotional abuse is any type of abuse that is not physical or sexual. So it can be through, so three categories, mainly belittlement, control, and manipulation. So belittlement is any type of constant insults, constant put downs, constant humiliation, invalidation of people's emotions, negative criticism. So it has to be constant, something that is repeated for it to be abuse. So again, verbal abuse by insulting, even yelling, or having starting. How do you say that in English? I have like a when you raise your voice and you
Okay.
start yelling at the person, and then emotional abuse. And also, we are using emotional abuse. Usually, people and also research talk about psychological abuse because it has a huge impact on people's psychology. So we use emotional abuse because our solution is based on emotional literacy, but it's all verbal, psychological, and emotional abuse. So again, belittlement, any type of repeated insults, put down, humiliation, um, can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
I was not sure if it was my like disturbance or yours.
I'm not sure. It was just spinning a
Okay,
little bit, so I'm not sure if it
okay.
was on my
So
side.
no, no worries. Then I think from I guess it's on both of our ends. It's with Instagram. Let's blame it on on
Okay.
Instagram now. So you were talking about three kinds of emotional abuse, and then we just lost our connection. So
Gotcha.
you're talking about belittlement and verbal abuse
Mm-hmm.
and psychological abuse, right? So
Right.
yeah, can you please
Okay.
repeat that? Because I think
Okay.
the information might be lost.
No worries. Okay, so I was saying that we are using emotional abuse as a term because we have, first of all, research talk about psychological abuse as a broader term. We at Omena are using emotional abuse because our solution is based on emotional literacy. And again, there are three signs when we talk about emotional abuse. So the bigger, the broader is belittlement, and then control, and then manipulation. Under belittlement, it's repeated insults, raising voice, put downs, humiliation, invalidation of emotions. It can also be negative criticism. It has to be repeated.
Mhm,
Hostile sarcasm,
mhm,
jokes. Sometimes people hide it, and behind that they say it's just a joke when really they are attacking the other person's character or just person, and that's sometimes where people get confused, and where they say I just do this because I've done this all my life and I haven't seen where it's wrong. But actually, when the other person on the other side receives that joke and that they're not okay with it, then it's normal to stop that. But we don't, because that's just the way it has been.
mhm,
And the other thing is control. So anything that will lead to isolation, to possessiveness, coercion, um,
mhm,
negligence, or just controlling the person overall. And then the
mhm,
last one is manipulation, which is gaslighting or threats. Gaslighting, which is a way to make the other person feel like they are in fault, they are crazy, or that they are wrong. So
mhm.
knowing how to play with that intentionally, those are um, characterized as emotional, psychological, and verbal abuse.
Yes, thank you, Francisca, for like helping us understand what emotional abuse is. I would request our audience to also ask questions if there is any sort of confusion, if I miss asking any question on your behalf, so that I can use your question to
Mm-hmm.
rescue myself even at the end, so that I would not
Please.
miss some important information from Francisca. So,
Mm-hmm.
when you were describing about emotional abuse, something that was going on in my mind is a lot of times in our context, especially in Nepal. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what happens in Madagascar or in the countries that you're working in. So usually what happens, but there are a lot of times when we are in some sort of relationship, and it might be a relationship between any person, with partners or with parents, or with siblings, or any sort of like interpersonal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many times and so many circumstances where people are found like yelling at each other, or also like talking and you're raising their voice, and or also like being possessive and calling that as a form of love.
Mm-hmm.
And like, a lot of times people justify their actions, saying that, oh, this is love, this is how I express
Exactly.
my love, and if I don't do this, then that means that I'm not concerned about you. I am not interested in you. So if I'm interested in you, that means that I am thinking about you, and that makes me jealous, that makes me possessive, or that makes me do the things that I
Right.
am doing right now. So,
Exactly.
how would you look at it, and how would you differentiate that kind of behavior, whether we should call it a love or we should call it bewilderment, or an emotional abuse? So, what is
Mm-hmm.
the distinguishing line between that?
Yeah. It's super tricky, especially when it's all you've seen when you grew up, and that's why emotional abuse is a cycle. Most of the time, when we did the market research, when we wanted to know more about the problem, we did ask people, if they knew about what emotional abuse was, and they would say no. Or if they would recognize it, we would show them videos and we would ask them, what do you think about this? And they recognize insults. They recognize that those are wrong. They don't recognize that they did it, but also they don't recognize that they have grown up in that type of environment. And it's later on that they come back and they're like, actually, it's how my parents treated me, and that's how I am behaving now, because that's the only thing I knew. I don't know the opposite because we haven't learned that. And it's very normal to feel like behaving that way is the norm, because that's what we see, that's what we see in movies sometimes, that's we see what we see everywhere. But that's the problem. We need to now talk about the opposite, which is based on emotional literacy, which is based on understanding ourselves first, and then after that, when we work out all of that, I would say it's not just understanding the tools, it's also understanding the trauma that you've been through and reworking so that you're able to now be more conscious of what you're saying, what you're feeling, how you're making the other person feel, so that you know exactly if it's love for you, or if it's control, or if it's belittling someone else, because most of the time people are not even conscious that they're doing it, because they're not conscious of what's going on inside. And that's why we're here talking a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about that. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah. There's always a thin line between, yeah. So when we say, okay, this person loves me, or my parents are loving me, or my brother or sister is loving me, and then
Right.
also being emotionally abused by them, it's
Mm-hmm.
always a thin line. But as you also mentioned, that emotional literacy does help us overcome this emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
how does it do so? How does it do so? And also, like, is there any example that you have done, and or how do you work
Right.
with someone who is going through emotional abuse, and how do you use
Mm-hmm.
emotional literacy to help them
Yeah.
overcome?
Yes. So first of all, what I wanted to say is that we have seen it. We have even maybe been a victim of it, or even done it to someone else, most of the
Mhm.
time because we didn't know that it could have an impact on the other person. But it's very possible to actually unlearn all of those. So what we do at Omena starts, first of all, understanding the problem at its core, meaning understanding the signs, understanding why it exists, and understanding the consequences. So when we talk about, when you say that those are the signs, first of all, and the signs that I gave you earlier, for example, it's belittlement, it's control, it's manipulation, you start seeing it because you can put a name on it, you recognize the signs. Those are red flags, early stage red flags in any type of relationship. It can be at home between
Mhm.
parents and children. It can be in a couple, parents or just boyfriend, girlfriend, or all of those settings when it comes to relationship. It can be at work. It can be at school. It can be everywhere, actually. And once you start putting a name on it, you start having a different lens. So when I say lens, is that when our educators go through our training, the
Mhm.
first day or the second day, they start saying, for example, they see a show on Netflix and they start saying, oh my gosh, now I see it everywhere. When this friend is, for example, making jokes or making sure that everyone is against this person, that is a type of manipulation. If it's done consistently, it can lead that person to start having a very low self-esteem, question themselves, and even become depressed, and sometimes when it's at the extremes have suicidal thoughts, and that can go very far, basically. So the first step that we do at Umena is that awareness of the problem, understanding what it is. When we understand the science, we also learn why it exists. And mainly all of the research that we found was because there are systems of oppressions that have been in place years and years like ago. It can be from, for example, from Madagascar, one of the biggest is colonialism. That's
Mhm. Mhm.
one, can be patriarchy. And I know in a lot of developing countries, mainly that trauma, that intergenerational trauma is what is still
Mhm.
keeping those people in this state of development. I mean, the country. Those have been proven by research. And when you understand that it starts in a macro level, and all of those trauma actually are passed down through generations, and then when it comes to you now, you yourself, you're going to perpetuate it by having, first of all, negative thoughts that are all aftermaths of that type of abuse that has been normalized and generalized in the society. And it starts with you having that awareness that, oh my gosh, I'm perpetuating this because this type of I've lived it in my house, and maybe my grandparents have gone through something worse, and that's what they have shared with us, and that's the only thing I know, so I'm gonna do that. But now the cycle has to be broken by understanding that first. So that awareness of the problem, why it exists, and now the consequences of that type of abuse on myself, on how I'm not able to reach my full potential because I've been restricted and I've been criticized all the time. I've been criticized or belittled or manipulated, and because I don't know that I've been in that type of environment, I cannot get out of it and reach my full potential. So having people understand it first is the key. And once they have that understanding, that's when we provide them with the social emotional learning tools, which is starting to understand themselves now. So it's a lot of our training is 8 months long, so that the person can first use the tools for themselves, start reflecting on what they have gone through, because all of the trauma, the codependency, sometimes codependency is a term that is used in psychology when someone has been in a very toxic relationship before, and where they're trying to get a lot of validation from the other people to feel loved, basically. So most of the time, people who have been abused end up in those codependent relationships, and it's very hard to get out of that, especially when you start to want to learn more about yourself, start to learning about your emotions, understanding what you've been through. So it's a lot of work, but it's possible. And that's what our training is all about.
Yes, yeah. So what I took from your like response is that I guess that when we think of emotional abuse, it's a lot of conditioning. It's very
Exactly.
unconscious way of conditioning that whatever you are going through, it's all right. So it's that's how life is. That's how like one is treated when they are in any sort of relationship. That's how society functions. I think it starts from that, and then it continues, and then it turns into a cycle. And unless like one realizes that, oh, this is wrong, and what I
Right.
have been through is not love, or is not a good relationship, rather I'm being abused, then that person takes a step further to break that cycle, and then that's how the cycle is broken. I think that is what I got from that conversation.
Exactly.
Also, yeah, and also like learned, and that it's so true that when we are in this sort of relationship, the codependency is so high that you start like you are being abused, but at the same time, the reason that you're not being able to get out of that cycle is that you're also seeking constant validation from the abuser. So
Exactly.
and that's a very difficult task to actually get out from that. So here what I'm thinking is, Francisca, that one thing is when we think of emotional abuse and emotional literacy, in our experience so far, talking about emotional literacy and making people understand emotional literacy is in itself very, very challenging task, because this is something that society has not learned about it or discussed about it, ever. Like these are the topics that are in conversation somewhere in the air, but it is not there in the practical life. But then
Right.
what you're also talking about is you are using emotional literacy to break the cycle of emotional abuse. So here I'm seeing like three things. One is that you're talking about emotional literacy, which in itself is a difficult thing to help people understand it. Then
Right.
you are helping people break that cycle. But then when you're doing it, there also another sector that, or another like whole component, that is like there are the whole set of abusers, no? Because if no emotional abuse happens or without abusers. So how do you deal with that? Because in itself, you as someone working in organization that works in this spectrum, it might be very challenging for you to like deal with those, because there might be a lot of like backlashes, repercussions from those abusers, because they are not going to take that as like, oh, well, I'm not like abusing this person. You are just, you people are manipulating it. There might be like some sort of blame as well. So how do you take this? How have you been dealing with this? And what sort of like your own emotional well-being has been in all of this, like in all this while in this journey?
Mm-hmm. Uh, yeah, so maybe I'll start with the way I've been approaching the
Hmm.
whole subject. So my area of expertise is entrepreneurship. So one of the things that we've learned as well when we do approach a problem is that we first understand the problem before we talk about the solution. So that's what we have done. We have tried for the past years to first understand the problem. Why is it so actually present in developing countries? And according to UNICEF, for example, in Madagascar, there is 80% of children who have gone through emotional abuse growing up in their household. So if you really think about that, 80% of the children is more than the majority. And those children who have had those type of trauma, and we know through psychology that most of the time when the children carry on the trauma and they don't get to, work through that, that's what they're going to carry on throughout their lives as adults. So those are children who are growing up with traumas and perpetuating that in their household, in their future households, in their relationships, in their friendships at school. So it's so normal to actually see in the community that you are both victims and sometimes perpetrators. And that's why I
Hmm.
said at the beginning that sometimes when you learn about those signs, you realize that, oh my gosh, I've done this, I've done this one, I've done this, yelling at people. I don't know how to validate people's emotions, so I've done that a lot. So most
Hmm.
of the time, you have done it unconsciously. Now that you know what it is, our work at Omena is to take what's the word? Keep people accountable now. We want to have the knowledge available to everyone so that now they take that step and realize, have that self-reflection. Oh my gosh, I've done that. And of course, we go through a lot of people who don't want to recognize they are still in denial and they don't want to. We are not pointing,
Hmm.
pointing the we're pointing the problem, not the people, but
People,
it's the
okay.
uh people's work to actually realize that, oh my gosh, I've done this, oh my gosh, that's
Hmm.
why actually this happens to people. So we're coming from a place of empathy where we realize that this has been something that we've all I'm so sorry. I'm like bouncing with languages here, so I think my brain is still switching. But the people start realizing when we share the information, and we come from this place of empathy where we're like, everyone has gone through this. And most of the time as well, the people who first learn about this, they start getting angry at, for example, their parents because they have
Hmm.
been, for example, in a very toxic relationship in their household, and they start saying, oh my gosh, it's because my parents did this and this. But actually your parents maybe didn't know better because that's what they have
Hmm.
gone through as
Hmm.
well. So we're here to actually break that cycle with us as people and take that
Okay.
responsibility for us first
Hmm.
and future
Hmm.
generations. Yeah, so that's how we are
Okay.
approaching it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very like I guess at this point is the right way to approach, because definitely as I am being a part of this conversation, I do like believe that there are multiple times when I myself
Mm-hmm.
have either like belittled someone unconsciously, or they might have thought that I have belittled them, I've controlled them,
Mm.
or I might have manipulated them. No, so from my side, I might see that okay, I'm just being concerned about them, I am
Mm-hmm.
loving them, that's how I
Right.
approach things. But then for the other person it might be like this prestige, like, oh, she's abusing,
Yes.
she's belittling me, she's like she's constantly involved in my life. So that might
Yeah.
be so I guess like now, I do understand now that, oh, it's not about calling someone a perpetrator or a victim, but it's more about like trying to see like where do I mostly fit in. So it's mostly am I the person who is in the like is someone who is in a position to be constantly belittled, controlled, or manipulated, or am I the someone who has been constantly belittling someone, manipulating or controlling someone in any forms of relationship, and trying to find that ourselves. So it's not like about blaming anyone, but helping them see their patterns, right? So helping them see where I actually fit in. So yeah, that makes a really good sense here, because otherwise it's really difficult to actually say, okay, so you are doing this and you are doing that, and then
Nobody wants to be blamed at or like pointing out. Nobody wants that. And I think most of the time that's where people shut down, because I don't want you to tell me what I do things. It's actually more sharing the knowledge and then having them have that awareness. And most of the time it's because even that's why the one of our activities at Omena is raising awareness around the issue, and more people now know about it, which makes it that we can keep more people accountable, because now the information is available. But until we're able to, have people put a name on it and recognize it, we cannot really talk about the solution. That's the way we have done things. And once they understand what it is, they're like, yes, we know now. Can you tell us how we solve this now? Because they see that it's detrimental, and that they have a lot of trauma because of that. And then that's where we introduce the other solution, like you said, which is even harder, because that is like a new language that we're teaching people when they have never seen it before. So it's I would say huge tasks in both of them in separate ways. They are hard to handle.
Right. So I was coming to that actually. So that's the first part is done, and also like helping people realize that whether they are in a position of a victim or the perpetrator, that's also done. But then to take that both as both realizing that I have this pattern of an emotional abuser, or I have this pattern of an emotional abuse, like victim of, I'm the victim of emotional abuse, is both difficult to do, right? We like, and it takes time to understand a new language, a new vocabulary. It takes, because it takes a lot of practice to actually practice emotional literacy as well. So my question to you is, so, like, when I realize that, oh, I have this pattern of constantly manipulating someone, or I have this pattern of being a victim of even emotional abuse, how do how should I approach it first? Because as a tool, emotional literacy in itself, it does take a lot of time. So when I first recognize that I have either been in a position of victim or either been in a position of perpetrator, how should I take that? How should I deal with that?
Yeah. So it's very deep. There's a lot of type of therapy that are used around the world. What we are using now is more collective healing. So we have what we call community of practice. So that community of practice is a place where our educators are using the tools, the emotional literacy tools that we provided them, which starts first of all by, again, unlearning everything they learned, learning about who they are. What do I like? What are emotions? What do I feel right now? What is the difference between reaction and response? Understanding the basics, first of all, through the training, and through the community of practice, they use the tools in their own relationships, where they start using that, like, oh my gosh, for example, my mom started yelling at me, and instead of reacting and answering back, I actually stepped back and I was like, why is she yelling right now? Is it actually because of what I did, or is it because she's going through something right now and going through something stressful? So we provide them with the tools, starting with understanding themselves, understanding who they are again. Because most of the time when you have been belittled, told who you are not, it's very hard for you to actually know who you are and who you are not. So trying to work backwards a little bit and trying to rediscover yourself, and not just get the support from the community, but also the empowerment to know that we're going through this all together and we're gonna heal together, everyone at its own at their own pace, but we're gonna go through this together. And that's what we have seen so far, that through the tools we provide them, they have been learning from each other, learning on their own, and also able now to share that with other people, mainly in the schools. So to answer your question, it goes really step by step, and a willingness for them to work through their traumas and through a lot of things that they have to unlearn. And it goes through understanding themselves, understanding their emotions, learning what are emotions in the first place, what are the different, it's like ABC, emotional literacy. What is being happy? How does it show up when I am happy? Taking the time to apply that, setting reminders on their phones at, I don't know, noon, and asking themselves, what am I feeling right now? And starting to reflect on that, journal about that. Breathe instead of reacting right away when someone else yells at you or insults you, and start understanding if this is really a problem for me, or is it the projection of what the other person is going through. A lot of empathy, a lot of understanding the other persons as well, which is, I think, one of the biggest things that makes people abuse other people sometimes, because they don't have that reflection, they don't have that self-awareness, they don't have that empathy towards the other person. So we are teaching that to our educators, who are then using those tools in their own relationships. So it does a domino effect after that, by them being the examples. And we have had a lot of our educators now sharing how since they joined Omena, for example, their younger sisters see them setting boundaries, and how they know now how to set boundaries, which was something that was never taught to the younger sisters, for example. So a lot of things that we see happening as a way to break that cycle and to prevent that type of toxic environment, by promoting the opposite and by promoting a more empathetic world, basically.
Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about, but again, the time is very limited. So we are gradually proceeding towards the end and the learning part and the stuff. But I really want to know that something that you have shared is quite relevant in Nepal as well, because a lot of things I see a lot of commonalities. And the one thing is that especially like everyone, but especially girls, are not taught to set boundaries. And if anyone sets boundaries, like they are either termed as bossy or given names. So there are a lot of like catcalling that girls have to go through. When they start like being aware of themselves, their own boundaries, and then start like setting boundaries. But you mentioned that you also were in a state where we're able to break that emotional abuse through emotional literacy. So how has your understanding about emotions and learning about emotions helped you personally and professionally, and now as you are working like against emotional abuse and trying to create a world where one can break this cycle, so how has this helped you in your personal life? Or do you find yourself in a situation where you recognize that you are also at this point like fostering emotional abuse, or perpetuating emotion, not fostering might be the positive connotation, but perpetuating it. So have you found yourself in that context, and how do you deal with that?
I think this work is a constant work, and we are growing and healing every day. So yes, there are times where I stop, for example, and it happens actually when I travel a lot and I don't get to do my routine, where I don't journal. So sometimes I'm not very in tune. It happens, or I'm very tired, and it's just like me, not lashing out, but perpetuating, sometimes not being present for the other person and validating what they're going through. But I would say that the difference between now and before would be I wouldn't be aware of what I would do. But while I do it, I am aware, oh my gosh, this happened. And I just actually, I don't know, invalidated that person's emotions. But I was tired. And it's like me reflecting on what happened and now addressing the situation, which I wouldn't have done before. And also realizing why I do that sometimes. Because yeah, it's an ongoing work. It's healing work, actually. It's mainly healing work because emotional health is closely tied with mental health. I'm sorry, emotional and mental health are super tied. So when I, for example, neglect my emotional health, where I work and work tirelessly and I try to meet deadlines, and that's where I see that it has impact on the way I lead the team, for example. That's where I am self-aware of what's happening. So I step back and I let them know that I need to take a break, or this is going on in my life right now. So I need to address it because it has an impact on the work that we do together. And to become the leader I need to be, I need to have those self-reflections and work on, what needs to be worked on, journal, or understanding why I'm feeling this way, or if I'm close to burnout, or I don't know exactly what's going on, but I need to leave what I preach, basically. And it's hard when we do this type of work in this type of scale, especially, but you have to be accountable not only for yourself, but for the people you work with and that the people you serve as well.
That's so true, because I also like find myself in a lot of those kind of situations, because a lot of times also, like, a very important thing, I guess, from from what you shared just now, and also from my experience, is that a lot of times when we say that we work in the field of emotional intelligence, or we work in the field of emotional literacy, in the field of literacy, the general assumption is that we are very prone to doing good things only. We're always like in a very good well-being. That's how people take us. But actually, the thing is that we also need to continuously work on ourselves, like be constantly aware of ourselves. We need to practice all the things that we ask others to practice. And sometimes when we ourselves are so like busy in working, there are times when we also like slip, and there are also chances that we as much as we know like what should have been done, but there are times when we like slip and make mistakes, and that's and what I have come to realize is that's all right. It's all right. Like, we should not be making this mistake as a pattern. It's a continuous thing. But then once we realize that we have made this mistake, like apologizing or trying not to repeat that mistake and being aware of it, like, really helps. So as we are approaching to the end of our today's live this conversation,
I can't believe it's been 50 minutes already. I'm like,
exactly,
wow.
we do have now next 10 minutes, and I do want to utilize that in a way that I might have not asked some questions that might be really important, and when we are having this discussion on emotional abuse. So is there anything that you would like to share before we like depart from this conversation today? Because there's lots that we actually need to talk about. This is just the beginning of this conversation, and we can definitely have other rounds of conversation on this particular topic, because this is very important and urgent, but something that has been overlooked for a very long time. Or even if it surfaces around there, like a lot of people find it difficult to actually talk about this, because this has not been talked before. So is there anything that you would like our audience to actually think about or share before we wrap this conversation up today?
Well, first of all, if you have questions, feel free to leave it on the chat, and maybe we can go back to it later or when the post is going to be shared, because I know that it's a lot of information that we've shared at once, and we usually do those conversations that the first step is emotional abuse and the second step is emotional literacy. But I think we're learning today that yes, it doesn't fit in maybe one call only, and we can do more.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what I would love to invite people to do is to maybe research more if this conversation, this topic was informative for you, or that it touched something in you, which usually happens when we have our emotional emotional abuse awareness sessions. Feel free to learn more about it. I think it can help realize a lot of things. If you want, you can also follow us on Omena Movement, which I can drop the link here later. We do provide a lot of what I just shared on our platform. We talk about the signs, we talk about the why it exists, we talk about the consequences. We also share a lot of social emotional literacy tools. And yes, I invite you to be more curious about it and to be open to learning more about yourself as well. Because at the end of the day, I think it all comes down to you realizing what happened to you and wanting to actually unravel that or unlearn. And I know that to some extent, a lot of people go to therapy to unlearn those, but it's also possible to work in groups and share, and also realize that you are not alone in what you're going through, and it's possible to heal from it. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what I wanted to share.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. So something that I would also like to reemphasize is that you should not be like forcing yourself to like watch this conversation all at once or all on the go, because sometimes these conversations might be triggering as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about like when we are talking about belittlement, constant belittlement, we're talking about constant controlling. Then if you are going through that in your personal life, or when you are realizing that, oh, I am as I'm in a position of a victim, or I'm in a position of perpetrator, both of this realization might be very triggering for you, might be difficult for you to like get over it in the first like in the first step, or so that's why if you find it difficult to actually be a listen to it on the first go, you can take a pause. Then you can I do hope that I will not have any technical issues while saving this recording. But yeah, so if you go through it all, if you want to like go through it all on the go, that's also fine. But then taking a pause and reflecting on each answers, and then trying to see where you actually are, might be really, really helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
also something that I would like to reemphasize is that please don't hesitate to be in touch in any forms. It's not like you should be like be in touch with Francisca or with me or with Omena Movement or with My Emotions Matter. There are other organizations which you which might find in your context available in your like in your neighborhood, which you might find a therapist who might be easily accessible. So you can approach them as well. So take it in a very like it as a very gradual process. That's what I would like to share. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
Francisca has also shared her details in the chat box. I will be sharing further in when I will be posting this particular conversation. As I and my request is, after you like go through our conversation, try to reflect on what is your takeaway from this conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
what are you taking away from this conversation, and what would you like to share to others like after hearing to this discussion. So that those are the two questions that I would like you to reflect on. And if you feel comfortable, you can also share that reflection and takeaway in our chat box as well, so that other people can see from your reflection. So as we approach like to the end of this discussion, I would like to thank Francisca you a lot. Our journey, like knowing each other, has come this far, and I guess
Yeah.
that we will be talking and discussing more about it. And both of the organizations that we are representing will be working together to build this world as a more in such a way that the people are more self-aware, people are more empathetic, and we learn from and we ourselves who are running this organization learn from our experiences and become more aware of the context, and we become more empathetic. And that's, I think that is what we are trying to do, and we'll be continuing to do. So any final words, and then we'll wrap the session up, Francesca.
It has been a pleasure to be on this live. I haven't been in a live in years, I would say, but it was a pleasure, and very happy that we get to connect and to work towards the same vision. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. Feel free to ask questions or reach out. I'll be happy to talk with you or to have you get more information towards understanding more about these topics. So thank you again for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day, Francesca, and all of the people who are joining us from Nepal. Thank you very much for joining in, and have a very good night's sleep. I'll have a very good day ahead.
Good day.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
good
much.
day.
Yeah. Bye.
Take
See you.
care.
We'll be in touch.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.